Our second speaker will be well known to many of us, so I'm going to invite Jonathan Sriranganathan, the former Greens mayoral candidate and former kind of local member where I live in the Gabba, to come and speak to us now.
Free, free the refugees!
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 My name is Jonathan Sriranganathan. I'd like to start by acknowledging the rightful owners of the land, the Yagara and Terrible people, recognising that sovereignty was never ceded and that there are many past wrongs and continuing injustices that are yet to be rectified. Thanks, Mike. For those who don't know, my father's a Tamil from northern Sri Lanka, Tamil Elam, and he left because of the conditions that Tamil people were facing there decades ago. The persecution of Tamils continues, and shamefully the Australian government continues to participate and collaborate with the Sri Lankan government, people who've been accused legitimately of war crimes, to lock up and deport Tamil refugees who come here seeking asylum. It is disgusting. And it is part of a much broader pattern of oppression of asylum seekers and refugees across the Western world, but particularly here in Australia. When I was struck a little while ago when Europe was debating whether to introduce similar rules for handling refugees as we have here in Australia, and even a lot of people in Europe were like, no, we can't do what the Australians are doing. Even that's too far for us. And I think that says a lot about the state of refugee policy and immigration policy in this country. For those who haven't worked it out yet, essentially what Labor is trying to do is make it easier to lock up and deport refugees, but they're also trying to persecute anyone who dares to help or support an asylum seeker. They're also trying to go after migrants, after anyone who essentially wasn't born here. I don't want to overstate it, but the effect of this legislation is so broad that it could be used to target almost anyone who wasn't born in this country. The powers that the minister is giving to themselves and to their delegates are so broad, and even the human rights lawyers are saying that this is creeping towards fascism. And I guess the question this prompts us to examine is, what the heck are we doing about this? What are we going to do to step up and apply pressure? And I wanted to start by highlighting that for a long time we've slipped into the framework where we have to say we have a responsibility to protect refugees because refugees are contributing positively to the community. And it's true. So many asylum seekers who come here, they work hard, they pay taxes, they contribute to Australian society. But that's not why we have an obligation to protect and support refugees. We have an obligation to protect and support refugees because they are fleeing persecution. That is the reason. And I worry sometimes that when we focus too much on saying, we have refugees are contributing to society, we set up a presumption or a precondition that people have to earn the right to protection. When in fact there are many people who've come from war zones, who've fled intense persecution, who have severe mental health illnesses, who've been really messed up by their time in Australia's offshore detention centre, who aren't able to work, who in a sort of standard economic neoliberal sense, they're not contributing to the Australian economy the way the capitalist economists would like them to contribute. But that doesn't mean they're any less deserving of protection. Regardless of what job someone's doing, regardless of how much volunteering they're doing at the local P&C, they are entitled to protection here and they should be protected. And I say this and I emphasise this because now what the government is trying to do is create a new framework where some refugees and some asylum seekers are treated as less deserving of protection or support than others, and that migrants are expected to earn the right to safety. And that is disgusting, and that is something that we need to stand against rhetorically and practically and politically here on the streets. And I guess I hasten to emphasise that because for those of us in the movement, I think it's important that we don't slip into that alternative framing of acting like people have to earn or deserve the right to protection. But what's so troubling about this particular move from the Labor Party is that they think they can get away with it, and the broader Australian community doesn't have the bandwidth or the energy to care about it. So many people are struggling to pay the rent. So many people are struggling to put food on the table right now. And Labor is taking advantage of that, and the Conservatives are taking advantage of that. And it's up to all of us to remind people that the struggles and needs of asylum seekers and migrants and refugees are intimately connected to the struggles of Australian citizens and the broader community here. We are all human beings. We all live on the same planet. And their attempts to divide us are nothing more than a cynical ploy to distract from the fact that billionaires are screwing over all of us. We know that, right? That's why they continue to beat up on refugees. That's why they try to keep blaming immigrants for the housing crisis. Right now, ordinary Australians are being screwed over by a broken economic system. Ordinary Australians are being screwed over by billionaires, and the Labor and Liberal parties are trying to say, blame the refugees. That is bullshit. It is utterly unjust, and we should not fall for it. We can see this propaganda a mile away, but a lot of people aren't paying close enough attention, and we need to remind them time and again. They are trying to turn the Australian public against refugees to distract from the fact that big corporations and billionaires are screwing over everyone. So do not allow refugees to become a punching bag. Do not allow them to blame asylum seekers and migrants for the fact that landlords and property investors are ripping off tenants. This is a broader game that the Conservatives are playing. We see this every time the financial crunch starts hitting, every time house prices start getting a little more expensive and people are struggling a little bit more. The political establishment looks for a scapegoat. They look for someone that they can blame to shift responsibility for themselves, and our responsibility is to continually remind people they are trying to blame refugees to let billionaires off the hook. That is the message that the Australian public needs to hear. That is the message that we need to share with our friends and family. It's hard because you want to talk about the technicalities. You want to explain why this particular bill is unjust and why it's unfair, and you go into great detail about how the legislation works. But at a broader level, what's going on here is that they're trying to beat up on refugees so that they don't have to readjust and transform their unjust economic systems. And I think it's really important that we get that message out there, particularly this year. There's a state election coming up later this year. There's a federal election early next year. Start to put that pressure on elected representatives and be willing to experiment with diverse tactics. It's great that we're signing petitions. It's great that we have our rallies in the street. But we need to get creative about different ways to apply pressure on people. We need to be willing to turn outwards to our communities, to organise those meetings in our local networks, to bring this up at dinner table conversations and to talk about it even when people aren't really interested in hearing about immigration policy. We have to be willing to be those loud voices that have uncomfortable conversations, and to remind people once again that billionaires are screwing over everyone, and the Labor Party is trying to blame refugees because they don't want billionaires to cop the blame for the fact that so many people are struggling to put food on the table and are struggling to afford a roof over their head. The last thing I want to say, though, is that borders themselves can only exist with violence. The border of a nation implies and presupposes the violence that is used to enforce it, whether that's a border in another country or the Australian border here. If you support the existence of national borders that keep people out, you also support the use of machine guns and violence to enforce that border. And that's something that we all need to think deeply about. We need to recognise that the border cannot exist without violence. And so if we are against totalitarian violence, if we are against human rights abuses, we need to think about whether we are against borders themselves. And I'll leave you with that consideration to dwell on further. But my view increasingly is that a world with borders that allows profits and commodities to flow freely across the earth, while low-income workers, and particularly people of colour, cannot move from one country to another, is a deeply unjust world. A world where big business can exploit workers in overseas countries, can sell their goods to Australians, but the workers who make those goods can't travel here, is a deeply unjust world. And I dream of a world where one day borders no longer exist. Thank you.